Right, so we begin by a question that we had from the English speaking audience, and it was a question about the Vinaya. So in last class, we were talking about the endowments, and we said first we have 10 endowments. The first list of 5 are personal endowments, and from the personal endowments, we had things like being a human born in the central land, having all senses complete, not prevented by heinous crimes, and the 5th one was having enduring faith in the source. And there we explained that source refers to Vinaya, and then we made the clarification that it doesn't only refer to Vinaya Pitaka, but it has to be understood as referring to all the 3 Pitakas. So in terms of the 3 Pitakas, so the 3 baskets, we know that we have the Vinaya Pitaka, we have the Sutra Pitaka, and we have the Abhidharma Pitaka. And when we talk about Vinaya, Vinaya means it has a general sense of discipline. So you can say that you want to discipline like inappropriate behavior, you want to discipline wrong views, you want to discipline afflictions, right? So in that sense, we can elaborate and we have a broader idea of the Vinaya. When we look at the collection of the teachings of the Buddha, such as the 84,000 bundles of teachings, these teachings are categorized in what we call the 3 baskets of the 3 Pitakas from the point of view of their subject matter. So if we have any material that is relevant to ethics, we say that this falls into the Vinaya basket. If we have any teachings that have to do with concentration, we say that this fall into the Sutra basket or the Sutra Pitaka. And if we have any material that is relevant to wisdom, we say that this belongs to the Abhidharma Pitaka or Abhidharma basket. All right, so as you can see, basically, we are categorizing from the point of view of the subject matter. So when we talk about ethics, right, so these are related to the 3 higher trainings. We have the higher training in ethics that has to do with Vinaya. We have the higher training in concentration that has to do with the Sutra Pitaka, and we have the higher training of wisdom that has to do with the Abhidharma Pitaka. So here, when we're talking about training, okay, ethics, how are we going to do this? Basically, what we try to do is to gain control over inappropriate behavior of our body and our speech. So we want to minimize this as much as possible. And the way that we will do this is through ethics. So we put some ethical rules, and hopefully that will discipline the body and the speech. So when we do this, first of all, we deal with manifest afflictions. We want to control the afflictions in our mind, right? So first of all, we deal with manifest afflictions, and we will do this by relying on the Sutra Pitaka. Then, in addition to that, we want to deal with the seeds of those afflictions. So that means that we have to work with the wisdom aspect, which comes from the Abhidharma Pitaka. And we have to recognize that when we talk about afflictions, so whether we talk about attachment, hatred, pride, jealousy, all of those things, they have a common root. And that common root is ignorance. It is the ignorance that is grasping at the self. So we need to develop the wisdom of selflessness. We want to have the wisdom that has the direct realization of selflessness. So we want to develop this type of special insight, comprehending selflessness. And the way that we will do this is by first developing the very stable concentration of calm abiding. So once we have the single-pointed concentration of calm abiding, from within this, we will develop the special insight, realizing selflessness, and with this type of wisdom, we will be able to eradicate the root of all these afflictions. Okay, so if we see where we are in the text, we say that we have two major outlines. The first one is the proper way to rely on the teacher, and the second one is how to actually train once you have relied on the teacher. In that second outline, we have further two subdivisions: the exhortation to take full advantage of a life of leisure and opportunity, and how to take full advantage of the life of leisure and opportunity. The first one is subdivided into two: how to practice in the formal session, how to practice in the in-between session. How to practice in the actual formal session has three parts: the preliminaries, the actual part, and the conclusion. In the actual part, we are looking at, again, two subjects, two main subdivisions. The first one is the great meaning of this life of leisures and endowments, and the second one is the difficulty of attaining it. We have completed the presentation of the first, and we're going to do now the difficulty of attaining it. So we have said that the actual session in the easy path is presented with two subheadings: the great meaning of the precious human rebirth, and how difficult it is to find. But already we mentioned last week that in other more extensive Lamrims, we have an additional outline. So when we have a more extensive text, we find that the first outline is identifying the precious human rebirth, then talking about how greatly meaningful it is, and then the third outline becomes how difficult it is to find it. Actually, it is greatly beneficial to do the first step, which is to contemplate, really to identify this precious human rebirth. But as we have seen here in the easy path, it is presented in a more condensed way. Okay, then we come to the second outline, which is the difficulty of attaining it. If you look at your text on page 10, it says, as for the difficulty of attaining it, while meditating on Guru Yidam on the top of your head, contemplate as follows. And from here we have the passage that is relevant to that. So you can see here again in the easy path, we don't have any further subdivisions. However, in more elaborate text, this subject of how difficult it is to find it is broken down into three sections. How difficult it is to find it due to the difficulty of establishing the cause. Number two, how difficult it is to find it due to its nature. And number three, giving an example that indicates the low probability of this. So it's just a difference of a more extensive versus a more condensed presentation. Or again, in other Lamrim texts, we might find a different classification. They say it is difficult to find due to the cause, it is difficult to find due to the result, and then it says difficult to find due to nature. So there is no mention, or there's no separate outline, difficult to find by means of an example. Again, do not think that those things are contradictions. It's just like a slightly different presentation. Okay, so we're looking at our text. It says the difficulty of attaining it. While meditating on the Guru Yidam on the top of your head, contemplate as follows. So we are familiar now with the meditation and the visualization. So we have the Guru at the crown of our head, and the subject we're meditating upon is the difficulty of obtaining this life of precious human rebirth. So it says, this life of leisure and opportunity is not only very meaningful, it is also very difficult to find. So you see here we have mention of the first outline that we have just completed, which is very meaningful. It has great purpose. So it says not only does it have a great purpose, right, great value, but in addition, so now it introduces the second subject, it is also very difficult to find. Okay, so he will have to actually prove why it is so difficult to find. And basically it comes down to this. It is very difficult to find because in order to find it, you have to avoid unfavorable conditions. And in addition to that, you have to establish favorable conditions. And these two things are quite difficult. So let's follow the text. It says, most of sentient beings, like human beings and so forth, commit the 10 known virtues on a large scale And this is a hindrance to attaining a life of leisure and opportunity. So he's saying here, this is the thing that we need to avoid. We need to avoid the 10 non-virtuous actions or non-virtue. This is something that we need to avoid. It is an adverse condition if you want to establish a precious human rebirth that is characterized with a full set of 18 leisures and endowments. But instead of avoiding it, if you pay attention, most human beings and other beings actually engage in non-virtue most of the time. So we're not avoiding the adverse condition. Okay, then it continues. Furthermore, in order to attain a perfect and complete precious human rebirth, one needs the foundation of pure morality, the assistance of generosity and so forth, and the cohesive factor of pure praise and aspiration. But these causes are practiced on a very small scale. So now, with this second sentence, he's talking about the favorable conditions. So in terms of favorable conditions, first of all, we need to have ethics. In addition, we need to support ethics with the other 5 perfections, such as generosity and so forth. And at the end, we have to top it up with stainless prayers for a good rebirth. These are the favorable conditions. But again, we seem to be failing to practice those. So as you can see here, it's identifying 3 causes that establish a precious human rebirth. The first cause is stainless ethics. The second one is that this morality has to be supported by the remaining perfections. And the last one is that we must make pure prayers. So for the first term, which is the first cause, is pure ethics, stainless ethics. If you are a lay practitioner, that means that you're following the ethics of abandoning the 10 non-virtuous actions. And then if you are ordained, depending on the level of your ordination, right? So whether you are Genen, whether you are Getsul, whether you have Gelong ordination, you have root vows. So, and there are a lot of those root vows. So there must be the effort of never contradicting, never breaking your root vows. And then in addition to the root vows, there are many other secondary vows and commitments that also have to be kept. So if you consider this situation, whether you are a lay person or whether you are an ordained, you can see that it is actually very difficult to fulfill the first of the causes that establish a precious human rebirth, this type of physical body. So it is a reminder already from the beginning of the list that it's very unlikely that we will make it. It's very unlikely that we will get another rebirth like this. So we have dealt with the first of the causes establishing a precious human rebirth, which was pure ethics. We established we have difficulty with this. The second one is practicing generosity and so forth. So the 6 perfections, they have to aid or to support our practice of morality. And the third one is making pure prayers. So how do we interpret this term pure? What does it mean to have pure prayers? So pure prayers, it means that your prayers have to be free from certain stains. So there is a stain associated with the individual of the small scope, and that stain is praying merely for happiness and well-being in this life. There is another stain that is associated with the individual of the middle scope, and this is the stain of praying merely for obtaining higher status, meaning a rebirth as a human or a god in your next rebirth. That's all you're praying for. And then there is another stain that is associated with the individual of the great scope, and this is merely praying to obtain the liberation of a hearer and a solitary realizer. So when we say that we have to make stainless or pure prayers, our prayers have to be free from these mistakes. So there shouldn't be just limited prayers, okay? And if you think about it, all the practices that we do, and then at the end, all the prayers and the dedications we do it so that we will have happiness in this life. So our prayers are not stainless prayers. So we have to say that the minimum level of stainless prayers is to pray for next rebirth, for something for the next rebirth, not for this life, not for happiness in this life. But keep in mind that this will be the minimum level. So actually, if we look at the causes that establish the precious human rebirth, we can see that we are not doing very well. In terms of ethics, we are not doing well. In terms of practicing the 6 perfections, we are not doing well. In terms of doing special prayers, pure prayers, to join with our next life, again, we are failing in this. So if the cause becomes rare, if the cause becomes difficult to establish, we understand that the result, which is the result of the precious human rebirth, obtaining again such a body, also becomes very difficult to find. Okay, so if we're looking at obtaining the result of the precious human rebirth that is characterized with the 8 freedoms and the 10 endowments, first of all, we need to establish the cause. When we examine this cause, we find that it's something very difficult to establish. If we cannot put the cause in place, it means we will not be able to get this result. Right? If the cause is difficult to establish, the result will not be easy to get. So you can see we cannot get it because we are influenced by adverse conditions. We continue from our root text. It says, thus in relation to bad migrations like animals and so forth, a fortunate rebirth is very rare, almost impossible to come about. And even in relation to happy migrations, the attaining of a life endowed with all types of leisure and opportunity is thus rare as a star during a daytime. So the previous paragraph was talking about how difficult it is to establish a good human rebirth due to the cause. And here it is talking how difficult it is to establish due to the result. So you see, he's talking about the results of fortunate migrations and unfortunate migrations. So it says in terms of unfortunate migrations, such as being reborn as an animal and so forth, you see that the majority of rebirth is there. It's much easier to obtain this type of rebirth. So to get, in comparison to that, to get a good rebirth becomes rare. Then, even if you look within good rebirths, if you try to find how many beings have established the precious human rebirth that has the full set of freedoms and endowments, then you see that this result is very rare to find. So you can see here we're talking in terms of the result. Not only it's difficult to obtain it due to the cause, it's difficult to obtain it from the point of view of the result. So as you can see, we are going through this contemplation where we say this precious human rebirth is very difficult to establish due to the cause, difficult to establish as a result. And keep in mind this last analogy says it's as rare as a star during the daytime. And then having contemplated that, it says, therefore, I will not waste this life that has been attained only once, and which is perfectly endowed with leisure and opportunity. It's difficult to find and is extremely meaningful when it has been attained, but rather I will take full advantage of it. So here is like we reach the conclusion of having understand how rare it is to find and realizing that even though it is very rare, once you find it, you can achieve so much with this life. So this life is so meaningful. So then you say, I am not going to waste it. I got one like this and I will not waste it. I will extract the essence. I will take full advantage of this life. And furthermore, to make the most of it, I will practice the synthesis of the instructions of the Supreme Vehicle imparted by the Guru Buddha, while always keeping him present in my mind with devotion. I will easily attain Buddhahood in one life. So here, what you're saying is that you are setting your trajectory. So you understand what a valuable opportunity you have. You say, I will make the best of it. So then you say, I will practice all these instructions, but I will practice in this special way where I see my guru as being indivisible from the Buddha and having very strong and irreversible faith with him, towards him. I will follow his instructions, and by doing this, I will obtain Buddhahood easily in one life. So you set your motivation, or you set your mind into that, and having done this, you're also requesting from the guru to bless you to be able to do that. So it says here, Guru Yidam, grant us your blessings so that we will be able to practice like this. And then as a result of having made this request, due to this fervent request, from the body of the Guru Yidam at the crown of your head descends nectar together with a 5-colored light, which enters in you as well as in all mother sentient beings' bodies and minds. It purifies what hinders this realization. So whatever negativity, whatever obscuration you have in terms of understanding how difficult it is to obtain a precious human rebirth is now removed. And it says, in particular, imagine that the special realization of this topic is generated in your minds. Not only you remove whatever blockage you have to generate this realization, but then you also think that you are receiving great blessings so that your life, your merit, everything like that increases. But particularly the realization you're seeking to develop is easily developed. So it is very important here to contemplate that you have met with the external condition, which is the Guru. The Guru is there present for you. You have all the inner conditions, which is the whole list of freedoms and endowments. And in addition to that, you have that recognition that allows you to discriminate between what is to be practiced and what is to be abandoned. So it is very good to, at this point, to summarize and practice in this way of you make the request, right? By considering that up to now, perhaps I have wasted time. However, I'm very lucky. I have not been born in any of the lower migrations. And even though I might have wasted time, I'm now determined that I will make the best of this. I will take the best opportunity, extract the essence of this life. I will not waste it in a meaningless way, and I will not waste it by creating negativity. So set up your motivation like this and then say, bless me to be able to practice in this way. It has a special benefit to practice in this way. Okay, so continuing after that, we come at the end of the actual session. We have the conclusion. Remember, we have 3 stages. We have the preliminary, the actual part, and the conclusion. So the text says the way to practice the conclusion is as before. So remember all the steps that we followed when we meditated on the proper way to rely on a spiritual teacher, the spiritual master. So here it says you just repeat exactly those same steps, what you do at the conclusion of your practice, right? So remember that one of the things that we have to do is go back and review the quality of our meditation sessions. If you find out that you have done a good meditation, then it's very good to rejoice and say that was a good session, and I'm determined to make the next session also a good one. If you review your session and you found that it was not a very good quality, then you are determined, say, okay, I didn't do well, but from now on, I'll make sure the next sessions will be of better quality. Then after that, it's very important, we do this dedication of with prayers of all the root of virtue that we have created and so forth, as we did before. Okay, so as we continue here, it says regarding how to practice during the intervals between sessions. Remember, we have the actual session that is broken down into 3 parts: preliminary, actual, conclusion, and then we have the period in between sessions. So in this interval between sessions, one should read the scriptures and the commentaries expounding the topic of a life of leisure and opportunity, as mentioned before. So we mentioned before that the period in between sessions is also very crucial. And whatever you're meditating upon during the actual session, you have to carry that theme in after you break your session. So the in-between period. So, and the best suggestion that is given here is that you read texts that explain further the subject you are meditating upon. So it's not good to spend your meditation meditating, let's say, on the precious human rebirth, and then in the period in between sessions, you just do whatever, or you read whatever. You have to read relevant material that will further support your practice. Okay, so there is something that we need to see here, you know, how we sort of like build up our determination for practice. So we go through contemplating three things: identifying the precious human rebirth, then explaining how meaningful it is, and then explaining how hard it is to find. Those three things become the reasons that establish something. What they establish is really a very strong wish to practice the Dharma properly. So your objective that is established by this reason, which is a threefold reason, is that understanding how rare, how meaningful it is, you say, okay, now that I have it, I want to practice properly. And when you say you want to practice properly, you come to the point of determination where it says, I will not waste this life for things such as money and enjoyments and wealth and, you know, all those, worldly activities. But instead, what I do, I will use all my energy so that from the bottom of my heart, single-pointedly, I will turn my efforts to Dharma. So we identify the reason, we identify what this reason establishes, and we identify the conclusion, which is a very strong intention that we have to practice properly. So there are different reasons why, people are not capable to practice, or they're not capable of seeing results or progress in their meditation. One of them is that, for example, maybe they have not obtained the right physical body. In other cases is that they're in the wrong location, or perhaps they haven't met with a teacher, or perhaps they have not been able to receive the instructions. If we examine, none of this is applicable in our case. In other words, we have the body, we have the place, we have the Lama, we have the instructions. So why is it that we haven't progressed? It's because we have not practiced. Why is it that we have not practiced properly? Because we have not found the certainty that this life, this precious human rebirth, is very difficult to find. And also we don't have the certainty about death and impermanence. Because we're lacking this, we're not practicing Dharma in a good way, like a good quality Dharma. We don't practice it with intensity. We will practice it with intensity when we find the certainty that this precious human rebirth is very difficult to find, and that there is always death and impermanence that is looming. Okay, so you can see now we're ready to start a further outline. So just to refresh our memory, we have gone through the first one, which is the proper way to rely on the teacher. Then the second one was how to train your mind after you have relied upon the teacher. In terms of how you train your mind, we have this exhortation to take full advantage of this life of leisure and opportunity. And then the second one is how to take full advantage of a life of leisure and opportunity. So for the first one, which is the exhortation, basically we inspire ourselves by considering all these topics of how meaningful it is and how rare it is to find. Okay, so once we have actually generated that mind that is totally inspired and says, definitely, I understand how precious it is. I want to make the best out of it. I want to take advantage of it. Okay, so the next question is, how do you take full advantage? So here we are here at the top of page 11. It says the outline, how to take full advantage of a life of leisure and opportunity. It has 3 subdivisions: training the mind in the stages of the path shared with persons of the small capacity, training the mind in the stages of the path shared with persons of the medium capacity, and training the mind in the stages of the path of person of great capacity. So you're inspired, and then you find how you can actually train. Okay, so as you can see here, for the first time, we are mentioning the path training in the paths of the 3 types of individuals. So one might raise the question and says, hold on a minute, we've already covered 2 subjects. The first one is training in the root, which is the proper way to rely on the teacher. And the second one is all this motivation, all this urging to extract the essence of the precious human rebirth. But these are not included under the subjects of the paths of the 3 individuals. So then the question arises saying, so do we have subjects that are not included in those 3 trainings? Does that mean that the trainings of the 3 individuals do not include all the subject? Because I see here 2 subjects were not included. Okay, so the way that we explain this is that if you look at Lama Tsongkhapa's great exposition, Lamrim Chenmo, he explains that in terms of the training in the paths of the 3 types of individuals, first of all, we have the preliminary, and then we have the actual foundation. And he really wants to emphasize those things. The preliminary is the proper way to rely on the teacher, and the actual foundation is understanding the precious human rebirth and how rare it is that makes you want to do something with it. So it's just stressing their importance in this way. Okay, so we mentioned that those 2 subjects are actually preliminaries and like the foundation for the entire stages of the path. So let's look how proper reliance upon the teacher becomes the foundation upon which we'll build all the stages of the path. So the idea is that in order to practice, in order to, achieve something with your practice, with your training, you must practice. In order to practice, you must come to know, you must come to understand this. And in order to come and understand this, you must rely upon a fully qualified teacher. You rely properly in terms of your thought and in terms of your action. And by relying in terms of thought and action, you are able to develop the realization of the stages of the path, and you receive the blessings from the Guru in order to do that. And therefore, to have all this development, you need to properly rely upon the spiritual teacher. So this is how relying on the teacher becomes the foundation for everything you will develop on the path. Okay, so now let's look how this understanding of how meaningful is the precious human rebirth and how rare it is to find. So how is this understanding is becoming the basis, becoming the foundation for all the practices that you will do from that point onwards. Actually, once you understand these 2 points in terms of the precious human rebirth, like I'm so fortunate to have this type of rebirth, you will develop this fervent wish that says, I want to take full advantage of this. I have something very rare, very meaningful. I want to do something with this life. And once you have generated this type of urgency or wish to do something meaningful, this will help you to overcome the 3 types of laziness. The first type of laziness is the laziness of putting yourself down. The second type of laziness is the laziness of procrastinating. And the third type of laziness is the laziness that comes through being attracted to other negative activities. So the first one, once you realize that, hold on a minute, I have a rebirth that is fully endowed. I have the full list of fortunes and freedoms and endowments. I have those 18 qualities that immediately boosts up your confidence. So you overcome this defeatism that says, I'm not good enough to practice anything. Second thing is that you understand that this life is greatly meaningful. And you have to say, if I don't do something in this life, now that I have this opportunity, it's a bit far-fetched to be thinking that I'm going to do it sometime in the future. So that overcomes the laziness of procrastination that keeps telling you, it's all right, you can do it later on. You don't have to do the practice right now. And then we have the other realization that this life is so meaningful. On the basis of this precious human rebirth, I can obtain liberation. I can obtain the state of Buddhahood. So then you're thinking, why am I wasting my time with ordinary worldly activities? Why am I distracted with those things? So you overcome the laziness of being attached to worldly negative activities. Okay, so we can look at the outlines here. It says training the mind in the stages of the path as shared with persons of the small capacity. So the first outline again is split into two: how to practice during the formal meditation session and how to practice during the intervals between sessions. In the first one, the how to practice during the actual session, we have preparation, actual practice, and conclusion. So you can see we have the same template for all of those subjects. So regarding the preparation, one is meant to make supplication as before, with the prayer ending with, I make a request to you, Buddha Vajradhara, the Supreme Guru Yidam, synthesis of all objects of refuge. So remember, we have 6 preliminaries. The last one is making petitions. We have 3 different types of petitions. And the last petition is a petition similar to driving a peg into the ground. And this is the one that says, I make a request to you, Buddha Vajradhara, Supreme Guru Yidam, synthesis of all the objects of refuge. So we do those preliminaries as usual. And then we continue with now the new subject matter that we're meditating upon. So from the text, it says, all countless mother sentient beings and myself, having taken rebirth in samsara, have undergone various and intense sufferings for a long time. It is due to the fault of not having reflected on the uncertainty of death, not having taken refuge from the depth of one's heart in the 3 jewels because of fearing the sufferings of the 3 bad migrations, not having undertaken correctly the practice of adopting and discarding white and black karma respectively, after having generated faith in the belief in the law of cause and causality. Therefore, I beseech you, Supreme Guru Yidam, bless us so that we generate mindfulness about the uncertainty of death and fear of the suffering of the 3 bad migrations, thus taking refuge from the depth of one's heart in the 3 jewels, and also being able to correctly discard destructive actions and adapt constructive ones. So you can see here we follow the same pattern. We make a request, and the request is fitting to the subject matter that we meditate upon. So first of all, we begin by saying how all of us, we have taken rebirth in samsara again and again. And during those rebirths, we have experienced great type of suffering. There is not one type of suffering that we can say we have avoided. So every type of suffering, we have endured this for a very long time. So there must be a cause for all that, right? So what's the fault? What is wrong here? It's because of not having reflected the uncertainty of death, not having taken refuge, not having undertaken correctly the practice of establishing white karma and avoiding black karma. And therefore it says here, we're making the request, may I be able to practice in this way. And following our request, we have again the practice or the visualization of the descent of purifying nectar. In the first phase, the purifying nectar will remove all negativities and obscuration that stops us from having this specific realization. And in the second phase, it will just flood us with blessings and all the favorable conditions so that we can generate the specific realization or specific subject we are meditating upon. Okay, so as you can see here, when we are training the mind in the stages of the path that is shared with the person of the small scope, in this session we have preliminaries, actual, and conclusion. The actual part, it actually consists of 4 subjects. The first one is contemplating death and impermanence. The second one is contemplating the suffering of the lower migrations. The third one is taking refuge in the 3 jewels. And the fourth one is having faith in the law of cause and effect. So 4 subjects for the actual session of training in the path shared with the individual of the small scope. Okay, so as you can see here, we have these 4 outlines. The first one is thinking about death and impermanence. And the reason why we are contemplating death and impermanence is because we want to develop a yearning for a good rebirth. We want to be seeking a good rebirth. And then we contemplate the remaining 3 subjects, which is the suffering of the lower migrations, taking refuge in the 3 jewels, and having faith in the law of cause and effect, in terms of showing what are the means for having happiness in that next rebirth, isn't it? So, as we say, there are 2, the reason why we have those subjects is to induce 2 things. The first one is yearning for a good rebirth, and the second one is to understand how we are going to establish this good rebirth. So in other Lamrim texts, the way that this subject is presented, the subject here is the training that is shared with the individual of the small scope, begins by presenting these 2 outlines, right? So when we talk about training in the stages of the path shared with the small scope, immediately they say there are 2 outlines: developing yearning for a good rebirth, and number 2, teaching the means for happiness in your next rebirth. And then the first one, developing yearning for a good rebirth, is presented again in 2 outlines. Your present rebirth will not last long and you will die. And the second one, consider what type of happiness or suffering you will experience in your next rebirth. So you might find it easier to follow this type of outlines, like the longer outlines that we have in the longer Lamrims, because it organizes the material. It's very clear to see the relationship between the meditated subjects and what they induce. Okay, so if you look at the top of page 12, it says the actual practice is again divided into 4: reflecting on the uncertainty of death, reflecting on the unfortunate rebirth suffering, training in going for refuge, and generating the faith of belief in the law of causality. All right, so here, as we can say, the reflecting the uncertainty of death is something that will, and also you can say here, reflecting the suffering of the lower migrations is something that will make you yearn for a good rebirth. And then training in going for refuge and generating faith in the law of cause and effect is the means that will help you establish this good rebirth. So maybe that's a good way of remembering the outlines. Again, notice that in the easy path, in terms of reflecting death, we just have 1 outline. However, Lama Tsongkhapa in Lamrim Chenmo expands this subject, and he says, when you are considering death and impermanence, there are 3 things to remember. The first outline is, the first outline is that death is certain. The second one is the time of death is uncertain. And the third one is that at the time of death, only Dharma will be of benefit. So in Lamrim Chenmo, you will find this presentation of 9 points of meditation on death. So we have 3 root arguments, and for each one of them we have 3 points. It's very beneficial to meditate in that way. So it is very important for us to contemplate this point that today I find myself in this existence. I have found this precious human rebirth. I have the full set of 18 freedoms and endowments. It's something very rare. It's not easy to establish, but actually I have obtained it. And once I have obtained it and I realize how difficult it is to get it and therefore how fortunate I am to have it, I also come to understand that it is something very powerful. It is a type of rebirth that is extremely meaningful. Whatever type of goal, whatever type of result I want to achieve, I can achieve it on the basis of this rebirth. If I want to have a good rebirth, a high rebirth, I can achieve it. If I want to obtain liberation, I can achieve it on the basis of this physical rebirth. If I even want to achieve the state of full enlightenment, that thing is possible because I have this type of rebirth. So what I have here is something which is very rare and very powerful, meaning something which is very meaningful. And because it is so rare and meaningful, I want to take full advantage of this. I want to definitely extract its essence. If I do not extract its essence now, what will happen if I let this life go by? Death will come. That's inevitable. And after death, our awareness does not become non-existent. It means we will have to continue and take another rebirth. And there are only 2 possibilities in terms of rebirth. Either it will be a good rebirth or it will be a bad rebirth. What is going to happen to me if I fall into one of the bad rebirths? If I fall into the lower rebirths and I'm reborn as a hell being or as a hungry ghost or as an animal, the suffering in these types of migrations is extremely grave. It's a very difficult situation. So how is it that I can avoid this, right? There's only one way of avoiding it. I have to abandon negativity and I have to practice as much virtue as possible. I definitely do not want to be reborn there because once I fall into one of those lower migrations, it is extremely difficult to come out of them again. And actually, it's extremely difficult from a lower migration somehow to reach all the way to Buddhahood, right? Is next to impossible. So also the Gadampa Geshes of the past, they used to talk about this, how the best body to obtain Buddhahood is the one that we have right now, this precious human rebirth type of body, right? So just consider what you have and how you want to extract the essence. So let's recap how far we have reached in the text. We have gone through the first couple major outlines. The first one is the proper way to rely on a spiritual teacher. That is the root of the path. The second outline is how to actually train once you have established such a connection with the teacher. So in terms of how to train your mind after you have Guru devotion, we have the exhortation to take full advantage of a life of leisure and opportunity. And the second one is how to actually take full advantage of a life of leisure and opportunity. And in terms of the exhortation, to motivate ourselves, we talk about the precious human rebirth. We identify this, and then we explain how to actually practice how to actually practice this, and we begin the actual training, the training of the individual that is shared with the individual of the small scope, which begins with these 4 subjects that are relevant to that particular part of the text. Okay, so we have time for questions now. It's a twofold question. The first branch of the question is about the stainless ethics or the pure ethics that we mentioned. We say in order to obtain the precious human rebirth, we need to have 3 causes. And the first of those causes was the pure or stainless ethics. So someone is asking for clarification, like how do you define pure or stainless ethics? Okay, so that's the first part of the question. So Geshe was saying that if you are dealing with an ordained person, someone who has the vows of ordination from Genyen level of ordination and beyond, when we talk about stainless ethics, we talk about maintaining the 4 root vows without breaking those. So first of all, to mention those 4 root vows of the ordained is to avoid killing, to avoid lying, to avoid taking something of value, and to avoid any sexual contact and misconduct. So as an ordained person, definitely these are the root vows and you have to maintain those. In addition to that, there are other secondary vows, and if if you transgress those secondary vows, it is very important that you purify them, confess and purify them, without allowing a period of 24 hours of the fault to remain unconfessed. So for the ordained, when we talk about pure ethics, it means you don't break the 4 root vows, and you're very careful with the secondary, but if you break the secondary, you confess them within a period of 24 hours. Okay, so that is very clear rules for the ordained. Geshe says, now for the lay people, I have not seen in a text any definite description of, but if we take the example of what pure ethics means for the ordained, you can say for the lay people, we can transfer this in the context of avoiding the 10 non-virtuous actions. It is not easy to avoid all of the 10 non-virtuous actions, but if we identify 4 of them as being the root ones, so we take the 3 in relation to the body, which is killing, and here killing is killing a human, stealing, which has to be stealing, taking something which has some value, right? And sexual misconduct. And then in addition to that, we add lying. So let's say for the lay people, do not break these 4. And as for the remaining 6 in the list of 10 non-virtuous actions, if they occur, make sure that you confess them and purify them by relying on the 4 opponent powers, and do it within 24 hours. So Geshe says, I think this is how I would define pure ethics. Okay, that was the first part of the question. The second part of the question was about the dedication. And it's like we do virtue, at the end we do dedication prayers. So we said also the prayers have to be pure prayers. And we said a minimum of prayers is that you're praying for your next life. And someone is saying here, if I am praying for my next life to be reborn as a human, to have a succession of human rebirths again and again, is to be able to practice the Dharma and so forth. Is this a pure dedication? Is this a good enough dedication? And Geshe was saying, yes, I think that this becomes a pure dedication. We talked about stainless prayers, and we say they have to be stainless because you have to be free of 3 stains. And the first stain that we identify was to pray for happiness and luxury and wealth in this life. And we say, if you're praying like this is not correct prayer. So the minimum we said is you have to pray for happiness in your next life. Minimum is to be praying for next life. So here Geshe is saying, of course, in order to reach liberation and Buddhahood, it will take a number of lifetimes. So praying that you are reborn as a human again and again and again and continue your training, Geshe says, I think, yes, it is pure prayer.
So the question is, we all know that we are going to die one day, but why is it that we are unable to realize this? What is it that is impeding or stopping me to realize the impermanence of myself? What can I do to come closer to this realization in our daily activities? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so it is like this, we all know we will die. And as we know that we will die, at the same time, we keep thinking, yes, but I will not die today. And definitely I will not die tomorrow. I have a lot of things to do tomorrow. I'm not dying tomorrow. The reason why we keep thinking it's not happening to me, it's not happening anytime soon, is because we have great familiarity with grasping at permanence. Since beginningless time, we have been grasping at permanence. And that means it is very difficult for us to remember impermanence. So it is very interesting to see that at the very beginning of the training in the path that is shared with the individual of the small scope, the first subject is to meditate on death and impermanence. And it's actually very beneficial to do that contemplation of death and impermanence by considering the three root reasons. Then we elaborate into 9 reasons, and then we reach 3 conclusions. So this presentation of 3, 9, and 3, it is very beneficial to do. Then Geshe was saying this is what we are going to talk in our next class, where we will do the actual training, the actual session of the individual of the small scope. So maybe you can wait until next week when we do this presentation.